always like to start with just sort of a thought exercise of Apple Computer. They make or actually there's Apple now. They make very innovative products that are oftentimes pretty radical departures from what most of the products look like at that time. And so sort of is an interesting question to think about, does Apple actually do market research? And they have a big marketing department. They have a staff of people doing market research. But especially if you've been reading the recent Steve Jobs biography, you know that Steve basically always went by his gut. And he was always convinced that he knew better than any marketing department or even consumers themselves of what consumers eventually would buy. And so he's had a pretty remarkable track record of being spot on. He's also had some failures which don't get as much publicity. First version of, or the Newton or the Apple TV, some of these things were not as quite as successful as some of their other products, but nonetheless, overall, he's been very successful. So there are a lot of people who like to think that they know the market just as well as Steve Jobs, and that may be the case, but realistically, there aren't a lot of people like Steve Jobs out there that are going to be right so often about what the market wants. But the bigger point I would make is, even if you are absolutely convinced that you know exactly what the market wants and you actually happen to be right, the problem is that Apple isn't a startup. They have the luxury of, if that product was a flop and they lost $100 million on it, that's okay, because they generate $2 billion in profits or whatever it is every quarter from all their other products. And if you're a startup, one misstep, even if you're 99% right, but that 1% that you were wrong costs you all the capital you saved to start your company, you're in the hole, you're never going to recover. So that's why you really need to do market research, particularly if you're a startup. Even if you're absolutely convinced that you know what the market wants, by comparison, developing a prototype is really expensive. I mean, it's virtually free to talk to potential customers and consumers to understand what they want, whereas it costs millions of dollars to develop a prototype, and then you might discover that the prototype you built is not 100% what the consumers want. Market research is cheap by comparison, and if you're still not convinced that those are good reasons to do so, or to do your market research, then if you hope to raise money from investors, then you absolutely better show that you've done market research. At the end of the day, as we'll talk about today, market research is an educated guess. Nobody knows for 100% certain how many they're going to sell, next month, next year, 5 years from now. But it's more about being prepared and showing that you're more knowledgeable about this market. Even though it's an educated guess, you are the best person to make that educated guess, and your educated guess is more likely to be correct than anybody else because you know more about this market than anybody else. And if you can't show that to an investor, they're going to say, well, if you didn't even bother to do the market research, I'm concerned about making an investment in your company, because what other kinds of steps are you going to skip thinking that you're convinced that you're right, but I don't want to put my money at risk in somebody who's a little bit of a gunslinger in that way. Okay, so again, these are the kinds of big questions that you're trying to answer. Who's actually going to buy your product? Who are going to be your first customers? How many of these people are out there? And then also, beyond that first level of questions, then you get to who are your competitors? Who should you be worrying about? And how strong are they financially? What's really different about their product? What's their distribution strategy or marketing strategy? How well they finance? All those kinds of things. You want to know as much as you can about your competition. And then related to that, you also want to know, at the end of the day, how big an opportunity is this? So I've talked to 3 people and they all seem excited, but are those only 3 customers in the world, or are there 3 million of these, or 300 million? You want to try to get a sense of that. So I would just emphasize again that we're kind of looking at this through the lens of a startup with limited capital, limited resources, but even in that situation, there's a wealth of information available. Okay, so the first thing I would say is, as far as will anyone buy your product? Well, I'm not going to focus on it in this particular workshop because it's a whole topic in and of itself, but you absolutely have to get out and talk to potential customers. This is called customer discovery. There's an authority, a book I would recommend. It's called The 4 Steps to the Epiphany by Steve Blank. I'm not kidding when I say this has become sort of like the customer discovery and marketing Bible for startups in Silicon Valley. Steve Blank is the acknowledged sort of marketing guru and startup expert. He's really become an authority in this area. This is a book that he's put together that really talks about making sure for startups, how do you get to that minimal product set that you know customers actually will buy. And actually, I'm going to show a quick video of Steve Blank talking about that. Okay.
And he believed he was going to be making a single board.
Sorry about the audio, it's not that great.
When I first started at Convergent Technologies, the founder, Alan Michaels, had left Intel, and he believed he was going to be making a single board computer that fit on one circuit board back in the early 1980s was a radical notion. And what Alan did was he went around to computer companies and said, look what I got. How many would you like? And they all kind of knew Alan from his work at Intel and said, wow, that's great. You know, we'll take 3 for our R&D lab. And Alan went, no, I'd like you to take 3,000. And he said, first company he went to said, Alan, you know, we're looking at a new type of computer, but you don't have it doesn't even have a case, it doesn't have an operating system, it doesn't have any applications. It's a nice building block, but maybe we'll take 3 and, you know, maybe we'll license the design from you. So Alan went to another company, this time NCR, and he gave them the same pitch, and they said, Alan, we'll take 5. He said, 5,000? No, we'll take 5. Gave him the same story. It doesn't have a box and whatever. And finally, Alan went to the third company, a company called Burroughs at the time. And they said, Alan, you know, we'd take 10. He said, oh, you mean you take 10 boards? Absolutely. But would you like to see my box? And they said, well, you didn't mention a box when you're, let me draw the specs of the box. It has an enclosure? And they said, oh, great. Does it have an operating system? Absolutely, it has an operating system. What else does it have? Well, what else do you need? Oh, does it have a word processor? Has a word processor. And what else? Well, what were you thinking about? Oh, it has one of those. Right there in discovery, Alan finally realized that what he was hearing was that what he had was good enough to get 3, but was missing a couple of zeros. Now, of course, he had to go back to the rest of his company, which had all of 7 people, and said, good news, I just got an order for 10,000 computers from Burroughs. Bad news is we need an operating system and a set of applications. And his co-founder, Bob Garrow, looked at him like he had been, you know, somebody hit this guy with a brick, because he was clearly, he said, Alan, you know, this is like 1987. You just don't, like, off the shelf get an operating system instead of applications. And so Alan, being a great entrepreneur, said, well, where do you get them? And Bob said, we're in Silicon Valley, I don't know, Xerox PARC, what are you going to do, hire Xerox PARC? He hired the head of the advanced system division of Xerox PARC, who came with an operating system, and the guys who wrote the Bravo word processor became the Convergent machine. He went from a company that potentially would have sold, you know, 25 boards in the first year to one that actually sold its company 4 years later to Burroughs for $400 million. Now, that's an interesting story about discovery, was that Alan was good at listening. But what's even more interesting is what happened at his next company called Ardent. Alan was now a successful CEO. In the early 80s, Alan Michaels was well known in Silicon Valley. Bad boy of Silicon Valley. Kleiner Perkins, everybody wanted to fund his next company. Anything he wanted to do. Alan decided he's going to build a graphics supercomputer, a cross between a Cray and a Silicon Graphics, which in hindsight turned out to be the exactly if you were making a floor wax and dessert topping in one. It's the null set, but we only found that out later. And this time, Alan Michaels was not in the field talking to customers. Where do you think he was? Any idea? Second company, successful CEO. Where was he? In the office. Who was he talking to? His investors. Who was the people in the field talking to customers? His VPs. Particularly his VP of marketing. Yours truly. And customers were saying, Steve, this is the worst combination of product features we've ever seen. But if you ripped off this piece and just gave us the server, the price performance of this stuff is really, and if you changed the vector unit to do this, it was great. Well, I went around to almost every national lab, I went around to the NSA, I went around to a bunch. A lot of excitement for something about 20% different from what we were building. Not completely, but different. So I went back to headquarters feeling really smart. I actually found out what customers want. What do you think happened when I went to Alan Michael's office and told him, hey, guess what? Our baby's ugly. In fact, your baby's ugly. What do you think he said? You're fired. In fact, I was fired 3 times that day. So, important heuristic here. If you're going to do customer discovery at all, and by the way, he never listened. Company went out of business painfully. One of the wonderfully enjoyable failure sagas of Silicon Valley. If I had 2 hours, I would tell you. But here's another heuristic. If you're going to go out and discover whether customers like your idea or not, this is not an outsourceable problem. The founders need to do this. Particularly, the people capable of changing strategy need to be the ones hearing good news and bad. Why? Because, it's like hiring, some consulting agency. What do they know? Or worse, Steve, you're just not explaining it well enough. Anybody ever hear that one? We just need to explain it harder. Getting feedback from customers is the most valuable thing you will do as entrepreneurs. It is not outsourceable. And if you're a technical founder, don't believe that, I'll hire a professional salesperson and they'll sell it for me without you ever leaving the building.
All right, so that was a little bit long, but it's really an important lesson. And the key distinction I want to make, so the theme here is really get out of the building and talk to customers. And the thing I would kind of maybe add is, a customer traditionally means somebody who pays you money. So you should not be approaching these, what I call future customers, saying, hey, I've got a product, I want to sell it to you. It's really a fact-finding kind of job. And appeal to their ego. Say, hey, you're a leading authority in this field, or you're an expert in this field. I could really benefit from just getting some of your opinions on this product that we're thinking of making, and you can help define our product direction. Then you're kind of like, oh wow, I can play a role in that. But really, you're trying to find out exactly what is the feature set that customers will buy. And Steve Blank's anecdote was, with that second product, they weren't completely wrong, but they were about 20% off from what the people really wanted, and that can make the difference between selling 3 versus 300,000, okay? And so if you're in that kind of situation, you need to find out what is that 20% difference that I didn't anticipate, and you're not going to learn that talking to fellow team members in your meeting room or in your dorm room or in your house or in your office. You're only going to learn that by talking to customers. And particularly being here at a university, there are some fantastic resources. I mean, we're like our own village here. We've got all kinds of industries, if you will. I've had 2 people just in the last couple months with new startup concept ideas, and they wanted customer feedback. One was some sort of system to measure, basically determine if athletes sustain concussions by censoring helmets and mouth guards and whatever else. Seems like a good idea. Saw it in the news and so on, but they had no idea. They never played sports. They didn't talk to people who actually work with concussed athletes and so on. So I helped arrange a meeting with them and the head football trainer of the Maryland football team. And they actually got to talk to somebody who lives this every day. And actually what my friend told me, he said, I said, how'd the meeting go? He's like, oh, it was fantastic. Really, really fantastic meeting. I was like, oh, that's great. So they loved the idea. He's like, no, he absolutely hated it. I was like, what do you mean? It's like, but we learned so much. We were so wrong in some of our assumptions. There is a need there. It's not that the need's not there, but the way we were approaching it was completely wrong. And so they've completely pivoted from what they did based on talking to this head football trainer. Another colleague I ran into, he has a service for mobile ordering for restaurants and at stadium vending services and so on, and he wanted to talk to some people about getting the system rolled out. And it's pretty hard to get the system rolled out for the Washington Capitals or the Redskins or whatever else, but he's a Maryland alum, and I helped arrange a meeting between him and the dining services here. They run concessions at Comcast Center. They run concessions at Bird Stadium. So again, we kind of have our own village here with a lot of industries, and there are people on this campus that are more than willing, very generous with their time, and especially when you kind of approach them as, hey, you're an expert, I'm looking for your guidance and expertise. You're not trying to sell them anything. That tends to close the door right off the bat if you're trying to say, hey, I have this product, would you be interested? Okay, so take advantage of that, the fact that where we are, it's really a unique opportunity to get out of the building and talk to potential customers, right? Okay, So that's customer discovery, get out of the building, then you kind of find out who's going to buy your product, etc. Once you start to have a little bit of an idea, once you've started to understand better what that maybe 20% difference that you have to incorporate, or the slight pivot you have to make, then you can start to refine a little bit more and use both focus groups and surveys. I'll just touch on focus groups really quickly. Focus groups can be very useful, but they can also be very expensive. There are service providers or people that will run focus groups for you. They say, hey, we're targeting a product that's for teenage girls, so can you get together a focus group of teenage girls and we can show our product and get feedback from them, and they'll take care of all that, but it can be pretty expensive, $20,000 plus or something like that. They have a facility and it's got a one-way mirror so you can observe the whole interaction, and you get write-ups. And that can be useful, but it is very expensive, so oftentimes it's not really something that a startup can afford to do. Although I do remember some startups back when I was in Silicon Valley who decided to do their own focus groups. So they would do it in a conference room at their on-site. They had one of their own staff members, facilitate the questions, and they basically recruited the target demographic from friends and families and that kind of thing. And it was pretty useful, but just be cautious in that, if you run this yourself, you really want to get the answer you want to get, which is, they love this, right? So you really need to make sure that you run it objectively, and if you don't get the answers you want to hear, if you get negative feedback or whatever, you need to take that to heart. And so that's the challenge of doing it yourself as a startup with limited resources. Yes, you can save money, but you got to really be careful about staying unbiased. Surveys, especially on the internet era, for if you have a social media app or a mobile app or Web 2.0 kind of idea, surveys tend to be the common way of getting customer feedback, because there's some great tools out there, which I'll mention in just a moment, like one's SurveyMonkey and one's Zoomerang. I'll show those in a minute, that allow you to blast out surveys via email to everybody, whoever you upload. It can be a database of 10 people, 100 people, 10,000 people, and all online surveys, clickable, and it shows you the results. It's great. Regardless of whether you do it online or you actually do the old-fashioned paper surveys, a few key things. One, when you design your surveys, use what my old marketing professor at Wharton used to say. He called it the backward approach, which is, from the answer that you would get from that question, what would you actually do, and will it have an impact on your strategy going forward? If it's like pretty interesting, I didn't really think, that surprises me, but you wouldn't actually take any action from that answer, then don't include it. We all know, we've all been approached by people wanting to take surveys. We hate it, right? And oh my gosh, how long is this going to take? So it's hard enough to get people's attention. So if you do manage to get people's attention to take your survey, you want to have as short a list of questions as possible to get them in and out. The worst thing is you actually get somebody to say yes, they're 2 minutes into it and they realize, oh my gosh, this is more than I bargained for, and they walk away. So backward approach is really useful. It's very intuitive. It seems obvious once you hear it, but if you don't know what you would do differently, or if it's not affirmation that what you're doing is correct from that answer to that question, then it's useless. Might be nice to know, but take it out. Other obvious things, make them very specific, concise, unambiguous. Also, there are actually tools. If you study, I took a market research class, which was very interesting. It was very statistics-based, but it would show you statistically which questions essentially were identical questions. And it was very fascinating, because you would look through a survey and you'd be very close to it, and you would say, wow, questions 1, 7, and 9 are basically the same question. And because I was close to it, it didn't seem like they were, but you realize that everybody responded exactly the same way to all 3 of those. So you can just use one of them. It's a good way of shortening your question. So eliminate your redundant questions, and if you do ask questions, don't leave them open-ended. Try to have them yes, no, true, false, or on 5-point scales. Don't have every question be an open answer essay question. That turns people off. 5-point scales, ideal. If you use a 100-point scale, it's just going to be useless data. Your answers are garbage. You can throw them away, because there's some people who are just sort of the happiest, most optimistic people in the world, and whenever you ask them to rate anything on 1 to 100 scale, everything is between 85 and 100, and it averages around 91. And there are other people who are just dreary, down, pessimistic people, and they answer those same questions, and they cluster between 65 and 72. And so when you average them, it's junk. So 5-point scale, you get everybody on the same page, and you put them all on the same, whatever the question is, you phrase it into the 5 points. So it could be extremely satisfied, somewhat satisfied, neutral, somewhat dissatisfied, extremely dissatisfied, or happy, or expensive, whatever you want to do. But extremely, somewhat, neutral, somewhat, extremely on the opposite end. That way you get everybody on the same scale, and it's actually meaningful when it averages out to a 3.5 or a 4.2 or whatever it is, okay? So 5-point scale. And then pretest. Pretest. What that means is don't send your survey out to a huge group. Really refine it and get it perfect with a small group of friends who are willing to sit through it and go through iterations, proofread, give you feedback, and get it right. And not until you actually get your survey through multiple rounds with your friends who are, because they're your friends, willing to subject themselves to proofreading this over and over and over and taking it. Then send it out to everybody. Why? Because the worst thing in the world, as I just said, we all know it's so hard to get people to agree to take your survey. If you blast it out to a mailing list of 2,000 people and then the next day you realize, oh my gosh, question 3, I used the wrong question, or it's meant to say not interested in such and such, and oh, I need to change the answer, the 4th choice of the multiple choice is wrong. If you send out another email and say, oh, I'm really sorry, that was a wrong question. If you started, please disregard that one and take this one instead. Forget it, you lost your chance, right? So pretest, get it refined, get it perfect before you send it out to lots of people. The 2 tools I was talking about, SurveyMonkey and Zoomerang, these are really excellent tools. I'll just show them real quick. Let me switch to duplicate. Okay, so kind of show of hands, who has used something like SurveyMonkey or Zoomerang? Oh, just about everybody, okay. So how many people actually deployed surveys using the tool as opposed to taking them? Okay, fewer, only about 6. So I'll just show it really quickly. It's worth showing. I'll just show SurveyMonkey. But the nice thing about it, they've got, well, there's a free account, and the free account is really useful. The premium account gives you all kinds of templates and pre-made templates for product concept tests or customer satisfaction. Let's go. So Zoomerang. So they have all these templates that make it really easy for you to create these surveys. Then you upload your email address from your Outlook address book or whatever else, and it just blasts out all the surveys to everybody. And I'll show you what one looks like. Like for instance, here, edit survey. Let me see. Survey file name. So this was a survey we sent out to some of our judges. Allows you to customize it, you give it a title. I just want to show the survey. Well, let me show the results. So it's got a bunch of questions. The nice thing about it is it blasts it out. It's on the web, so on their email, they just click on the link. It takes them to the survey. They fill it out. And then you get all the results in this nicely presented format with summaries of ratings. These are multiple choice questions, percentages. It just shows you everything in a very, very clean way, what the results of your survey were. And extremely useful tool. You don't have to manage it by emailing them out each person individually. It does all that for you. And SurveyMonkey is the same thing. To show, for instance, this was a product survey. This is based off a template. But again, just very easy to use tools that allow you to change the title. This is a pre-made template, but you can change all the questions. This was, how did you first hear about the company, search engine, trade show, whatever else. You can edit the question, move them around, change it to a multiple choice, true, false, how satisfied are you? I mean, very, very, very easy. It's a really super tool. Highly recommend it. Okay. All right, moving on. So get out of the building, talk to customers, understand what they want, help refine that through focus groups and surveys, more likely surveys, including free tools. And then you want to understand your competition and how big the market is, all right? How do you find out the answers to those kinds of questions? Well, whole list of different things you can refer to. I'm going to show a few of them. In fact, I'm going to focus on trade associations, annual reports, and the UMD library. So let me show trade associations first. So trade associations are basically oftentimes just lobbying groups You know, it's a bunch of lawyers banding together trying to you know, make sure there's legislation that's beneficial to the poultry industry or the airline industry or whatever else. So you might not think that would be a lot of use to you, except for the fact that, surprisingly, or maybe it's not surprising, a lot of these trade associations have fantastic data about their industry that is a gold mine for you trying to understand the industry. So, for instance, here's the Entertainment Software Association. It's a fancy name. It's basically the trade association for the video game industry. And as you see the logos go by, you see Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, Electronic Arts, Activision, and so on. And they all pay, I don't know what their annual dues are, but I'm sure it's expensive. It might be million or millions of dollars. But so while they're bitter rivals in the industry, they all band together and pool a bunch of money together that they each throw into the pot and give it to the ESA each year to fight legislation that can, you know, against violent video games or that just negative kinds of things. But one of the things that the ESA does is they try to show what a great industry it is and how healthy and how many jobs it creates and so on. So almost always on a trade association website they have some industry data. Here, in fact, right here it says industry facts right on the home page. And click on industry facts. What is my internet? Here we go. Okay, so they have a bunch of industry facts. This shows a $25.1 billion industry in 2010. 24% of purchased content was digital content. 72% of households play computer games. Average, it gives you demographic information. Average game player is 37 years old. If you delve in deeper, it has subcategories like economic data. And so it just gives you all kinds of, which states have the highest number of employment numbers in this industry, what contributes to the gross national product, what genres of games sell best. I mean, all kinds of really, really useful information about the industry. So great source of information. Just relating to this clean energy competition. So if you're thinking about doing some sort of wind power idea, well, there's an American Wind Energy Association, and I just go in into Google and type, you know, Video Game Trade Association, and up came the ESA. Wind Energy Trade Association, up came the American Wind Energy Association. So very easy to find, and again, right off the home page for the American Wind Energy Association is industry statistics. Yeah, I didn't realize, probably competing for internet with all the students, these lunchtime students surfing throughout Stamp Union. So, but anyway, all kinds of data, how many megawatts of wind power capacity installed this year. It has all kinds of fact sheets of total wind power capacity installed, under construction, number of states with wind power, top 5 states with wind power capacity, and they have other things you can delve into, like let's see, wind energy fact sheets. So you can dive in and get some real detail here. Wind energy fact sheets, basics about wind energy, manufacturing, state fact sheets. In fact, that's if we look at the state fact sheets. Why so slow? All right, well, since internet is acting slow, but you get the idea. There are trade associations for just about anything, so that's a great place to start. It gives you an overall snapshot of the industry, some demographics, where growth areas are. Here, see, look, they have a report for every single state. I mean, this is fantastic, right? So, so trade associations, and again, just go into Google and type industry trade association. You'll most likely find one. I'm going to jump to University of Maryland resources. In fact, we've got 2 people from the University of Maryland. Want to raise your hands? Yeah, so if you have other questions, you can see them afterwards. But being at a university, one of the wonderful things, in addition to having all kinds of industries like in sports and dining services, we've got fantastic resources available to the community through the library. So the background is that there are market research reports that that consulting companies or big companies will write. So if you're interested in the smartphone industry, you can buy like a 300-page report that tells you everything you possibly want about the smartphone industry, who the market leaders are, how much it costs them to make their phones, where their main sales distribution network is, and everything about it. But these reports are easily, oftentimes, $20,000, $50,000, $100,000. They're really expensive. So as a startup, you wouldn't have access to those. But at Maryland, the university probably gets some nice discounted educational pricing, but in addition, the university subscribes to it and makes it available to students and faculty in this community. And I used to only talk about two. I just learned today from them that we actually have a third one, which is great. But Mintel, IBIS World, and Gartner are all excellent sources of market information. I'll show you what they look like. But the URL to remember is vbic.umd.edu. It stands for Virtual Business Information Center, which you can see at the top, Virtual Business Information Center or vbic.umd.edu. And from this homepage, you can access all the databases alphabetically or by category. So for instance, if we want to know about the industry, I could click on industry, and the first one here is IBIS World. A little bit later, further down, I think there was the Mintel is around there. But anyway, if you click on it, it brings up a whole slew of market research reports. It's hard to see here, but I'll just kind of read them out. The big category here: agriculture, forestry, fishing and hunting, mining, utilities, construction, manufacturing. So they have market research report, retail, trade, transportation, information, and just to give you an idea, for instance, in information, there's one on movie theaters and movie and video distribution if you want to know how that value chain works and how the whole movie industry works. Video games, cell phones, all that kind of stuff. Again, sticking with the clean energy theme, I'll just show that there is one for under utilities for solar power. So under solar power, I'm going to try to change. See if that works. Under solar power, they have this market research report, and again, it's kind of hard to see, but on the left, they have an industry at a glance, industry outlook, products and markets, competitive landscape, major companies. For instance, major companies. So just look at that for a sec. They talk about this NextEra energy company. It gives you some competitive intelligence about NextEra, and it tells you some about some other companies, Tessera Solar, Abengoa Solar, and it kind of tells you a little bit about them. And then there also are, I think it was competitive landscape. Well, anyway, so it gives you kind of an overview of who the key players are and what some of the key things are about that industry, the drivers in the industry, and et cetera. I like Mintel a little bit better. I feel like their data sometimes is a little closer to what you'd want if you're kind of researching an industry from a startup perspective. And they have reports that cover a whole slew of categories: automotive, beauty and personal care, food and drink, financial services, leisure entertainment, technology. Just for instance, I'll dive into health and wellness. To show you what's in health and wellness. You have to agree, if you're on campus and you're accessing the internet through campus, and then this just goes through, I think if you're off campus, they require your university ID, right, to log in. So just to make sure that you're part of the university community. So as soon as this comes up, it's being a little slow. All right, well, while I'm waiting for that. I was just informed also that in addition to IBIS World and Mintel, that the university also gets Gartner reports. And if you're in the biotech field, we've got a bunch of organizations in the state of Maryland, including the Maryland Biotechnology Center, and they subscribe to a set of Frost & Sullivan market research reports specifically for the biotech industry. You have to go to their offices to use them. They've got an office in Rockville and one in downtown Baltimore, but those are additional resources that are useful. So we talked about trade associations. I showed you the University of Maryland Library resources, vbic.umd.edu. Actually, now that it's up, here, I'll just show you, since it is up. So health and wellness. So if you wanted to have a product that, for instance, targets, I don't know, obesity or something, they have all kinds of data on what percentage of Americans are obese and how much they spend on you know, diet aids and even stuff like what percentage of people stick with what kinds of diets. And I mean, really, really good, useful information that you can put in your business plan. All right. So the last thing I want to cover is annual reports. So the trade associations and this market research reports from the University of Maryland Library are good to get an overall macro understanding of the industry. So you have a sense, is this like a $10 million industry or is this a $10 billion industry? And that's really important from the standpoint, for instance, if you're raising money from investors. If you're going to go to the tier one big name venture capital investors, they're not even going to look at you unless you're playing in a $1 billion market. It may be a great opportunity for you personally if it's only like, say, a $50 million market and if you got 30% market share, then, you know, that's not bad. You basically you know, have about $15 million in sales a year, and if it's just a small family business, that could be some very financially rewarding and personally fulfilling business for you. But an investor is going to look at that and say, that's too small, I want to invest in bigger things that go much bigger than that. So it's not to say it's not a good thing to pursue, but you should know how big your market's going to be, just so you know how big can your business grow to, and also if you are going to raise money from investors, what kind of investors to go to. But you also want to know about specific competitors. So that's diving in a little bit more on the micro level to say, okay, I understand the industry is this big, but who do I need to really worry about and why? And that's where annual reports come in really handy. And the way to find annual reports, or the harder way, is to go directly to a company's website. You can go to apple.com or logitech.com or microsoft.com and search around. Usually it's at the bottom. It says about the company or corporate info or investor info, and basically dig around eventually until you find the annual report. The easier way is to go directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission website, United States Securities and Exchange Commission website. So sec.gov, and you can see under here under filings and forms, it says search for company filings, and you can type in the company name. So you can type in any company name and it'll come up with a list of their reports. So I'm going to use Logitech. I've used this example before just because I used to work in this industry and so I'm really familiar with it. But what you're looking for is something called the 10K. They list, basically the quick background is that if you're a publicly traded company, meaning you can buy a share of that company on Ameritrade or E-Trade or whatever else, you are by law required to, at a minimum, every quarter submit these documents to the Securities and Exchange Commission that talks about this is how our business is doing. And it's meant for investors, and it's supposed to offer protection to investors to know that when you buy a share of that company, what you're getting yourself into. And once a year, they're required to submit what's called a 10K, which is an annual report. And the reason this is really useful is that there oftentimes is a wealth of information in that annual report that you're not going to find on their website, that you're not going to find in magazine articles, that the company has shared in this forum and this forum only. Even though it's available to the public, a lot of people can't find it. And they all look very similar. In fact, in recent years, they've upgraded the technology, so it's now all accessible via the web. And they all look the same. They have this boring United States Securities and Exchange Commission title, Form 10K, the name of the company. And the parts that I'll highlight, actually I'm going to show the versions I downloaded. I downloaded these earlier. So you can view it online, or you can actually download the PDF. So the only thing, the caveat I'll share with you is that annual report and 10K are supposed to be the same thing. It's short, 10K is just an abbreviation for the annual report. But some companies actually create two separate documents. And their annual report, they take excerpts from the 10K that they submit to the SEC, and then they put this really nice glossy marketing brochure around excerpts that they send to the SEC. So you're going to miss a lot of the key information that you would want to get in the raw SEC document. And just real quick, I'll just show you, this is what Logitech did that year. This is what they call their annual report, and they have this beautiful color brochure with, friendly, smiling people using their products, and it shows all kinds of graphs with numbers and trends going up. Again, good-looking people using their products, and it's not until you literally get to page 22 or 23 before the font suddenly changes into a pretty boring document, and then this is the government form. And it's only excerpts. So make sure you're looking at the 10K, and as I said, the 10K is got the same format. The things I wanted to highlight are every 10K is divided in the same way. It's a prescribed template that companies must use. And there are two sections, no matter what the company is, that I would jump into first to really try to glean some really useful information that you wouldn't find elsewhere. The first is what's called, sorry the font's kind of small, the first is item 1, business, and the other is item 7, management, discussion, and analysis. Okay, so you could get the annual report for Under Armour, you can get the annual report for Microsoft, for iRobot, for you name the company, Procter & Gamble. They're all going to have the same template and go to item 1, business, and item 7, management, discussion, analysis. You might find some other useful information in other places, but what I typically find is that here are where you'll glean a few nuggets that you won't find typically on any other website or their marketing brochures or anything like that. What kinds of information am I talking about? Well, let's jump in. So item 1, business, as you might expect, first of all, it just gives you kind of an overview of what the company actually does. So this might look very similar to what's on their corporate website or their brochure. And in the case of Logitech, they say, hey, we make all kinds of peripherals for PCs, for music, for gaming, et cetera, et cetera. Gives a little background, founded in Switzerland. We're publicly traded both on the US and Swiss market. And they say we've got 6 main business units. Keyboard and mice, kind of webcam kind of stuff, gaming, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, and by the way, the reason I chose this is because I used to oversee our video game business unit when I was with the startup out in California. So I was always really interested in just the video game portion of a business. And if I went to the general website for a company like Logitech, it would give me all kinds of information about mice and keyboards and all sorts of other things I didn't really care about. Whereas in the annual report, it started to break things down. They highlight that they manufacture all their products in Suzhou, China. So that's kind of interesting. That might be useful to know that they've got a talent pool that can make high-tech peripherals in Suzhou, so that may or may not be a reason that you want to be in Suzhou as well, but it's useful to know. And then they start to talk later on, this is all again in item 1, business. They go through all kinds of products that they offer, but again, it's mice and keyboards and speakers and stuff I'm not interested in until I get to gaming. And then they start to talk specifically about these are the products that we offer, and we offer them for the PlayStation, Xbox, etc. Again, this stuff isn't earth-shattering. This is stuff I can probably find on a website, but here's where it starts to get more interesting, and this is still under item 1, business. They talk about who their customers are, and at first blush, I would have guessed if I'm going to be making like some sort of video game product that my customers are going to be the major retailers like Best Buy and Staples, or no, I mean not Staples, but Walmart and places where people buy their video games and electronics. But in reading this, it says Logitech's products can be found in major retail chains where they typically have access to significant shelf space, and these include Best Buy, Circuit City, Office Depot, Staples, Target, Walmart, etc., etc. But earlier they say, even though their products can be found in retail chains, which is what that sentence says, it says our Logitech's direct sales force sells to distributors, and our distributor customers typically resell products to retailers like Best Buy, Circuit City, and so on. And so they say their major customers in the US are distributors named D&H Distributing and Ingram Micro. So right away there, that's again something you're not going to find on their website or anywhere else, and that's really useful because if you want to go out and talk to customers about buying your product, you should not be calling Best Buy and Target and Walmart. In fact, if you call them, they're going to say, well, why are you talking to me? The fact that you're calling me indicates that you don't really understand how this industry works, because if you did understand how this industry works, you would be going to talk to D&H Distributing and Ingram Micro. That's who we buy our video game products from. And so you may have just lost a lot of credibility because people say this person knows nothing about the industry. What else do they not know besides this? I don't trust them. I'm not going to do business with them. I'm going to go with the tried and true people I know who understand my business, understand my supply chain, my customers, my distributors. So this was already potentially some really useful information, one of those nuggets I was referring to. Also, they go on to talk about their competition. And they give some general characterizations about the competition. But then they even go on specifically to say, in the gaming industry, we think our competitors are Intech, Pelican, Mad Catz, Cytec, and to some extent Sony. So if you want to get in this industry, and the reason we're looking at Logitech is because we know let's say I'm using my hypothetical of creating a video game product. If I think Logitech is a competitor, and Logitech thinks that Intech, Pelican, Mad Cats, and Cytex are competitors, well then I should worry about those guys too. And maybe I run across one here that I didn't even know about, or maybe I didn't think was that big a deal, but for whatever reason Logitech thinks they are. And turns out that some of these companies are also public companies, so I can go get the 10Ks for those companies as well to try to better understand what they're doing. Okay. Then if we jump ahead, I'm going to go to item 7 now. So that was all in item 1 under business. The reason item 7 is useful, it's called management's analysis and management's analysis, because if you go to like Yahoo Finance or Google Finance or whatever else, it'll give you an overview for the company. In the case of Logitech, it'll tell you in 2010 they did $2 billion in sales. 2009 it was, or whatever it was, 2.4 billion, and previous year is 2.2 billion. So it shows you how the overall company did. But the bulk of those sales are keyboards and mice and webcams, and what I'm really concerned about is how well does Logitech do with their gaming business? Because if it turns out that even though they did $2.6 billion in sales, that they actually only did $200,000 in sales in the video game industry, wow, that's surprising. They're a market leader. If all they sold was $200,000, maybe this isn't worth getting into after all. So you want to get a breakdown, and in fact, under item 7, management's discussion and analysis, they do break down by business unit. So they show, for instance, this is from 2008, but they had $2.4 billion in sales, which is the same number you would find on Yahoo Finance or Google Finance or anywhere else. But they also break it down to say they got $600 million from keyboards, from mice and trackballs, about almost $500 million from keyboards, et cetera, and about $146 million in revenue from their gaming industry. Aha, okay, this is helpful. So Logitech does about $150 million. Seems like they probably have a third of the, or say 25% of the market share. So if I got to 10% market share, then I could be a business that's probably a $60 million company. So it kind of gives you a little bit of sense now of how big this could be. And kind of tying back to what I said at the very beginning, and especially in business plan competitions, those are the kinds of things that judges want to hear. They don't want to hear Logitech's a $2.4 billion company. That's not helpful. That doesn't tell them, if I invest in you, how big are you going to be? Logitech is, first of all, you're not Logitech, and second of all, Logitech is a lot of other things besides just gaming. So that's very useful. And the other thing I'll highlight, I won't read it explicitly, but they also talk about whether it's trending up or trending down. So this is, again, you won't find this in Google Finance or Yahoo Finance, but they talk about specifically for the gaming business. It might look great. Maybe Logitech went from $2 billion to $2.4 billion in sales from last year to this year. But it'll tell you how specifically did the gaming business do. And in fact, in that year, even though their overall sales went up, their gaming sales actually went down. Oh, well, should that give me pause? Maybe this isn't a good idea to go after the gaming industry. But then they give an explanation why. They said the reason it went down is because we were right in this transition from the PlayStation 2 to the PlayStation 3, and from the Xbox to the Xbox 360. And in those transitions, there's always a little bit of a lull before people jump onto the new system. Oh, okay, well, that explains it. I can give that answer to my investors as well to show that I'm knowledgeable about this industry and that this is actually a growing opportunity. This hiccup in this past year actually is not indicative of what's going to happen going forward. So, so again, those are things that you can glean out of the annual report. Really useful source of information of understanding your competitors and valuable. I would highly recommend that you take advantage of that. I guess I'll stop here for see if I have any questions, and also I'll be happy to hang out afterwards. You guys can get some more pizza. I'll stay up here. But any quick questions from the yeah over here?
Would you suggest the risk factors? Those are really important from the perspective of the company, when the company is going to be happening as a risk from the officers.
Good point. I'm gonna get to that in 1 second. I have another question here.
Let's say you have a product that straddles two industries. Is it best to, I'll give you a crazy example, I'm not doing this, but let's say you have a healthcare video game. Okay. Would you look at the reports of all related industries and try to triangulate that data to produce a market research?
Okay. So let me address both as quickly as possible. So I just want to see if we had common questions. But so for risk factors, this is a useful section to look at. This is basically trying to tell the investors, if you're about to buy some stock of such and such company, I think Apple stock has been going through the roof, I want to buy some, you're supposed to read this section to understand all the things that could go wrong with Apple. And basically, it's there so that Apple, you can't sue Apple and say, hey, I bought your stock and then it dropped in half. Well, hey, we listed all these risk factors. And in fact, they got a little bit of flack a while ago because they didn't disclose that Steve Jobs had health problems as early as they should have, and that probably should have been listed here. But generally companies put everything under the sun here. Some things that are very specific, hey, our key supplier for this particular component in our iPad, for Apple, for our iPad is this. If that distributor were to disappear or decide not to sell to us, then we would have problems meeting demand for iPod. So it can be something very specific like that. And they might even have something as general and as crazy as, our headquarters is on the flight path to San Jose Airport. If a plane landed on our headquarters, then our sales would be significantly impacted. So it's got everything under the sun, but usually there's something in there that might be useful. As to your question for different industries, so the good thing is that you're trying to find an opportunity, or you're trying to create an opportunity, whereas there's a pretty established, say, video game industry, pretty established health industry. There may not be much going on right now that kind of combines the two, although now there's Wii Fit and et cetera, but just imagine before that. So it's hard to, there is no market data for that because nobody's done that before. And so now the question is more, can you make a compelling argument as to who would actually buy this thing and how big an industry would be. And so there you need to at least start with looking at those two industries so you show that you're well informed about those two. But then, this is true not just for your suggestion, but in general, the further out your idea is where it doesn't relate as well to something that exists, at the end of the day, you're making, what I was saying at the very beginning, an educated guess. And so the best you can do is just kind of point to here's where the video game market is today, here's where health aids are, and people show a preponderance to spend more time and more money in video game kinds of things, whereas traditional obesity treatments people don't stick with. So we think we can sway, instead of only 3% of people sticking with their diets, so just use that as an example, if we incorporate video games, we can get that to 12%. So that would then kind of build it from there. But again, it's just, at the end of the day, it's about coming across like you've done your homework better than anybody else. And so even though if we could look back 5 years from now to say, well, your number is correct 5 years ago when you talked about this, that's not what investors care about. They want to know that this guy's going places. He obviously understands this problem better than anybody else. Right. Yeah?
Are these sources also covering services and consulting companies?
You can. I mean, a lot of companies are public companies. Some of the consulting companies are, so they have annual reports. But consulting companies, generally speaking, it's not the kind of thing that investors would invest in because, if you look at whatever it is, Booz Allen, Accenture, any of these, they hire smart people out of school, and they pay them what is a good salary to that recent grad because they've never worked before, but then they bill them out for 4 or 5 times that. And the partners collect the difference, and that's basically their model. And you have to have smart people that do good work for people to be willing to pay that price that you're charging. But that's basically the consulting services model. You don't really need to do a lot of market research. It's more about landing clients who are willing to pay them what you want to charge and who feel like they got what they wanted out of the engagement. I don't know if that was the right answer. Private companies, you can go to places like Hoover's, which is available from the University of Maryland database, but Hoover's is because they're private companies and information sometimes is hard to come by, Hoover's can be wildly inaccurate at times. In fact, as recently, I haven't looked in the last year, but I remember about a year ago I looked on Hoover's to see what Facebook's revenue was, and they listed it at like 30 million when everybody knew it was like several $100 million. So it clearly was wrong. All right, so I don't want to keep everybody, I want to give you guys a chance to get some more pizza, interact, but I'll stay up here. If you guys have questions, I'll be happy to field more questions up here. But enter the Clean Energy Challenge, enter the business plan competition, come to Entrepreneur Office Hours. Those are all described in the flyers that you have, and really appreciate you guys coming.